about 7, going on 8 years. My background out of Illinois State was to work in farm management and then move into the conservation arena and working with soil and water conservation districts in Illinois. And then I moved over into the fertilizer industry and traveled all over the eastern half of the United States helping, besides selling a product for the fertilizer company, but dealing with some of the states and their containment regulations and responses to spills. And that's kind of where I expanded my environmental background. That led me into the Illinois Environmental Protection Agency. With that, we will start a little bit of a background. If you haven't seen where we live in Springfield, that's our home next to Lanphier High School. It's a brownfield site. It started out as the old Springfield Watch Company, then progressed into the Salmon Electric Company, electric meters, bomb fuses during the war, and then eventually it fell into disrepair after Salmon Electric moved, and then it was acquired and redeveloped using the Brownfield program. And I believe in, I think maybe 97, I forget the date, the Bureau of Air moved into the agency as we see it today. It is the oldest environmental protection agency in the United States, even 1 year older than the U.S. EPA. And so we have that as part of our history. Mission, location, history. I'm not going to read all of that. It'll be posted on the web, but that's a little bit of our background, and what you see is the core acts by which we operate. Within the agency, we have the primary bureaus of air, land, and water. I will tell you that each are unique and sometimes don't communicate very well with the other. And given my position, I try to create an environment where we have cross-media relationships in that today, with climate change issues as they are, we see an intermix of response activities that need to come from air, land, and water. So we strive to have more of a cross-discipline in relationship to new climate change issues and regulations arising. You see the divisions of legal counsel, the labs, administration, director's office. We have offices toxicology, emergency response. The associate director's office, where I reside, you see the environmental justice, community relations, policy and outreach, where I am at, and then pollution prevention. We're going to talk a little bit about, here again, as I indicated, what I see in Illinois. And we're going to start with what I see as the drivers or the driver. Population. The longer I'm around, I just see the consequences of population and what it's doing to depletion of resources, the opportunities to respond to issues as industries try to grow, as subdivisions are built. We're all concerned today about this environment that we live in, and that level of response is growing as our population densifies. Picked this up the other day. 70% of you will be around in 2050. Of course, a lot of us have read and have seen the articles that say by 2050 we're going to begin to see some of the consequences of climate change. And I will have a tendency, and I was telling Nancy, I'm careful as I talk to my audiences, and this I would perceive as a friendly audience, but as I move around the state and talk to various audiences, as you might imagine, climate change is not always the most popular subject in front of some groups of people. But here again, we know world population as it stands today is growing at about 75 million a year. Within that 75 million and the overall population, standards of living are increasing. So the demand for resources grow exponentially. It's indicated that by 2030, we're going to need 55% greater production from our ag sector. One of the things I look at in terms of the footprint, the policy footprint, the regulatory footprint, is the difference or the playing field between our Midwest states. We want to create a friendly business environment. We don't want to be restrictive to that business environment. We want to protect our citizens, and we want to interact with our citizenry in a way that is able to create laws and regulation that's beneficial to them. One of the things I look at is this, of course, density of population, and it does make a difference. Of course, our density is much greater north of Interstate 80, but I always point this out to various groups. You know, it may not see, and we live in a resource-rich environment. We do not live in what I would term a dense populated states, although we do have that area of Chicago and Cook County. Downstate, we still have a open space relative to our population, but it does have an influence, and you'll hear the comment as we go through various hearings and such, not in my backyard, not in my universe, and it gets to be a very emotional and extended debate a lot of times in terms of how we build things in Illinois, how we use resources. The neighborhood is changing. I'm just always simply amazed as I drive down the highway. Out in the middle of an agricultural community, you have mansions like this. Well, now, what's going to be built next door to this mansion? Not an ethanol plant. Sure not going to locate a coal mine. So as this footprint of urbanization out into the rural sector, it creates challenges that gives us, in agriculture, some real cause for debate, you know, how we exist with our new neighbors. In the regulatory arena, Gulf hypoxia is probably our largest area of debate and regulation and future policy as we look at nitrates and phosphates in our streams. Currently within our agency, we have a nutrient standards work group where we're talking about developing nutrient standards for our streams in Illinois. We have those standards for our lakes and ponds and such. You know, we have another group that's looking at nutrient trading. So we try to develop discussion groups that will look at the future and develop those water quality standards that we need for clean water. Pesticide application, there's currently, before US EPA, a rule or I think it's a rule that talks about aerial application, drift, you know, shall it be a part of the label? What are the impacts for agriculture? And it's interesting, spray drift, there was a Senate hearing here in Illinois this past fall where there was a move to further regulate aerial application because of the proliferation of vineyards, organic farms across the state. You would think we're all in this agricultural arena here and we all get along. That's not so. We had production agriculture out there who had this history of applying pesticides and such aerially, and we encountered drift. Now, drift has been part of the agricultural landscape for many years. But now all of a sudden we have a vineyard out there. Now all of a sudden we have a family farm that's growing vegetables, or we have an organic farm. Spray drift crosses that operation, and there are significant damages and concerns. So today we're trying to develop some methodologies to help the industry better coexist. And in that effort, we're with the Department of Agriculture looking at a site where we can list and have a map quest for all organic operations, vineyards in Illinois, and make that available through the Department of Agriculture and also through the various entities within the state that apply pesticides. Waters of the U.S., there's a move for a redefinition talking about is that ditch or is that mud puddle or is your family pond, is that considered waters of the state? Some would argue yes. We would have a tendency to look at it in terms of overall population. Does my pond that I have on my property, does it affect you, the neighbor? And so there's that discussion of it would be property rights a lot of times. So you get into that. But here again, we do see effects. We do see ponds that serve as markers and can have a overreaching effect to water quality within a watershed. Clean Air Act, particulate matter. We keep boring down. If it was 10 parts per million 10 years ago, now we're looking at 2.5. As a farmer and I'm operating a piece of equipment, does that dust or particulate matter transcend to someone else's property and cause them health issues? Does it create within that what may be carried by that particulate matter? Does it create issues with adjacent landowners? And so particulate matter is something that will be an emerging topic, especially here again as we have this expanding population, and the guy in the mansion, you know, he doesn't like that dust growing over onto his property. As you may or may not know, U.S. EPA now is required to regulate CO2, carbon dioxide. I'll talk about some strategies, methodologies for dealing with that later on. But here again, we're, as you know, moving into the greenhouse gas area and being required to monitor some of the greenhouse gases. And we are now required to monitor greenhouse gases within the agency also, although we don't necessarily have a regulatory footprint at this time. This is something I kind of forget. I think, you know, you listen to the talking heads on radio and TV, and you think all of our oil comes from the Middle East, and I'm always mindful of when I see this that, you know, the bulk of our oil comes from Canada, Mexico, Venezuela. One of the things that of interest that mirrors this is our fertilizer. 60% plus of our fertilizer comes from Russia, Middle East. Our potash comes from other countries, not within the U.S. Now, phosphorus, we're a net exporter. We have rich phosphorus supplies. So we can almost look at our fertilizer businesses in the U.S. and have somewhat some of the same concerns we have with our energy footprint in terms of where we acquire energy. So I always throw this in as my slides just to make people mindful of where our supplies come from, and that the fertilizer that we use here in Illinois and throughout the United States has some of the same concerns. Rural Renaissance. I love to talk about rural Renaissance because what does Illinois, what does agriculture have here in the United States? It has land. It has open space. It has the ability to grow renewable products. It has the ability to be sustaining. And so when we look at the future, I think our true opportunity comes within the rural renaissance, the rural America that has lost population, that has lost business, will at a time in the future, and we're beginning to see some of the initial moves to ethanol plants building in rural areas. Where are we seeing the wind power units built? Rural Illinois. So I think the real opportunity comes with open space and agricultural lands as it transform into what may be this carbon society of the future. Some of the things we struggle with, definitions, biomass. One of the biggest issues I dealt with this last year, we had a company in Illinois that wanted to burn chicken manure. No big deal. Chicken manure has been burned for years. There was this pilot study that was through a university that wanted to burn the manure, wanted to monitor the emissions from this process. But and this was manure coming out of Pennsylvania. Well, in the process of getting it here, they ran it through a dewatering process, got it down to about 20% moisture. Well, in our definitions, it then became a processed waste, which came under a whole new rulemaking, and we couldn't allow them to burn it. I will say we did eventually get through it, but it was the pilot project was ready to move forward, caused a delay of 6 months or so. So we're currently within the agency looking at redefinitions of biomass, what the future may look at as we look at different carbon substances and how we may interact with them in the future. I will point out, Miscanthus. I live down in Christian County. So it's Dudley Smith Farm is at my back door. And I've been up here on campus many times. Who doesn't know about Miscanthus in Illinois? So my picture had to include Miscanthus, and over on the right is the Miscanthus cube that we acquired at the Farm Progress Show. Those little cubes there on the left, and then on the right is a 80% coal, 20% Miscanthus briquette or cube being made down in southern part of Indiana with a project being funded in some part by Peabody Coal, which is right now they're looking for acres. Where are we going to grow this Miscanthus or this is actually, switchgrass. Where are we going to grow this switchgrass or whatever energy grass to combine with the coal? And then the cube in the middle, that sits beneath the lump of coal there, is out of a garbage, out of a landfill. They've cubed it, and this is that probably goes back 7 or 8 years ago from a project that was being contemplated here in Illinois. But here again, it's as we look at the future. Is that a biomass? Is it processed waste? What are the toxins within that? There's those concerns, and we're developing burners, gasifiers, new ways of handling and processing that type of product in the future. Coal. It's you might imagine in the Environmental Protection Agency, we really struggle with coal. We advocate for clean coal technology. We have the Future Gen project over in Mattoon. We have another project down in Taylorville, Illinois, called Tenaska. So we're really looking to the future and what clean coal technology will be. It is a resource in Illinois. It does drive a political agenda. But on the other side, we do know that it does have an extreme emissions footprint. one that has caused concerns, and one has caused environmental harm in the past. So we in the agency are beginning to look into the future as to what clean coal technology may bring us. Energy independence, E85. We have approximately 4,700 gas stations in Illinois. I think we have 200 E85 pumps now. There's been an issue with the Underwriters Laboratory certifying the E85 pumps that now has drug on about 2 years and has caused the expansion of E85 pumps to be dampened somewhat. Also, the industry is looking at the new renewable fuel standard that the U.S. EPA should be proposing this summer, and that could potentially be a move to 15% content. That would cause another expansion in the industry beyond what we have today. We have some of the staff here that's worked with water efficiencies in plants. In 2006, we had, I think the number was up at 52 plants proposed for Illinois. 8 of those actually built. At that time when we had the 50-some plants proposed, they were concerned, especially in this region, what it would do to the Mahomet Aquifer. It was going to pump it dry. There were other areas around the state. What was this effect going to be to rural wells? I would say the industry has answered a lot of those questions. Their efficiencies today from what they were 4 years ago, much greater. 4 years ago, we were looking at 6, 7, 8 gallons of water required to process a gallon of ethanol. Today, I would say it's more like 3. We have some plants that may be down as low as 1. So the industry has been able to adapt and change their process to lower their water footprint. Combined heat and power. Going back to the water efficiencies, I will note that in Galva, Illinois, Big Rivers is a total zero discharge plant today. We have zero process water discharge plants, but Galva, Big Rivers is a totally zero discharge plant in that they have a crystallization process which they take all of their water discharging from the plant and recapture it all and bring it back in through that process. Combined heat and power, we have a plant up in Lena, Illinois, Atkins Energy, that has been able to reduce its energy footprint using combined heat and power by 30%. Here again, energy efficiencies in plants. It's all about the bottom line. Nothing will drive you more, and as we all know in this economy, and a little bit of stress to our pocketbook causes us to look at things differently. The ethanol industry has been a great case and example. This is why they've pursued water efficiencies, combined heat and power, and other energy efficiencies. They need to and have struck to that bottom line of survival. Energy independence, solar panels. We're looking at a Chinese company coming into the Rockford area this year. That will be very interesting in terms of we see a great deal of solar panel activity in the Chicago area. I surveyed, it was a very surface level survey of the ag industry in Illinois, and we had some solar usage back in the 70s and 80s as it was connected with grain drying operations, but the adoptions of the new solar panels we've not seen, and so we're working on a program to bring that type of technology to farms throughout Illinois, along with residential level wind turbines. Where does that fit into the agricultural scheme of things? We have some equipment dealerships that have built some of the lower level wind power units, but we do not see them out on the farm sector today. here again, it's just I put this in. As I drive across Illinois, I think Illinois should be #1 in terms of wind power. Texas far leads the nation in terms of wind power. I'm sorry, I keep stepping in front of you. And so this is a graph that just shows where we are, and we are growing. I think within another 2 or 3 years, we could have the potential to move up to, third or fourth. It's interesting. There's now a lot of discussion about wind power units out in Lake Michigan. So I find them unique. I call them the sentinels of the agricultural landscape. Some people like them, some don't. I think overall an acceptance of wind power in the landscape today. Algae. Saw the big Exxon announcement of what was it, $600 million for research. Our interest is in the research area and the application area is how we can use algae to capture some of the emissions footprint coming from power plants, and we like to, or we hope this technology begins to expand and see more of that. I think that's a real opportunity for applications in the power plants and in other, even in the ethanol industry, from what those emissions, how they could be captured. I did know, and Tim Lindsay, I learned you have an algae experiment over on the university power plant, so I'm looking forward to seeing that. But I have a great deal of interest in what can be done on the emissions side of what algae can offer us. The biofuel side of it, it's viable. We know what algae can do in terms of what its mass can produce as an output to diesel, biodiesel. It's still, I don't would not say it's commercially in the market, although the airline industry and other small transportation segments are looking aggressively at algae. There's a lot of futuristic designs out there, stacked greenhouses and such that would produce algae, which I find interesting. But here again, algae, 5-6 years ago, I had a company come to me and they were proposing biofuels plant from algae up in the Kankakee area. It didn't go anyplace, but I thought, well, that's just a flash in the pan. We won't see any more, but algae doesn't go away. I want to talk a little bit about carbon markets here. The Illinois Conservation Climate Initiative, we started back in 2006. The state of Illinois just facilitated the discussion and created a carbon market unique to Illinois. There's another one over in Iowa called Aggregate, and then there's a similar program up in North Dakota called operated through the National Farmers Union. We partnered with our sister agencies, Department of Ag and Natural Resources, to conceptualize this. We looked at resources of Illinois. Here again we had this open land, a lot of conservation practice, a lot of things that applied themselves to what we wanted in carbon offsets. We eventually partnered with the Delta Institute, which is a policy group that's charged with whose mission is economic development in the Great Lakes region. They became our aggregator. I always look at and explain aggregators as we look at the Illinois landscape. We have the elevator. Well, the elevator of carbon trading is the aggregator that pulls the various carbon practices together into a tradable unit. But we provided Delta with a $20,000 grant to start this program in 2006. if we initially looked at doing it within state government, and truthfully, if we had taken that path, we still probably wouldn't have a carbon program today. But we reached out to a third party, and we're able to get this up and going. Today, that project, it says $2 million there, but it's actually generated over $3 million from that $20,000 grant. And there's an extended program off of the Conservation Initiative that's now in 14 states. So we're really proud of this program. And what I find unique, and here again from a policy perspective, sometimes we try to do things in state government and we forget about our third-party partners or other stakeholders out there. Today, I think we should look more and more to the third-party environment out there as a way to get programs on the ground. It works much more efficiently. We have a lot of roadblocks within state government, and by using our partners, we can adopt programs and strategies to implement policies much more efficiently. Market-based conservation. We're not using tax dollars for these programs, and so it has a much better feel to the public. And today we are, as I mentioned earlier, in that we had a nutrient trading work group at the agency. We're here looking at stacking carbon payments on nutrient payments, and even down the road we'll look at ecological attributes to trade. The strategies will be the new approach in the future. I think we're forced this way, and I'm quite glad personally, because it's here again, the bottom line, we're not using tax dollars. We're using regulations as a foundation. There are a lot of environmentally motivated companies out there, landowners. I think the opportunity to improve conservation, improve water quality can truly exist through these trading programs. After all, when we look back at the history of our agency, look what we were able to do with acid rain and the NOx and SOx trading programs. Even though those were within government, I think today government has some limitations to sometimes how we can strike at some issues. And here again, by using an entity like Chicago Climate Exchange or any the other exchanges that exist here in the United States, we can develop a market outside of government that does not use tax dollars. And so I think it has a lot of merit. Just a little bit in what we see when we talk about carbon credits. I get this question a lot. How does it work? Well, as we look at this very simple graph here, we see that blue line as the carbon price. And the way the program is structured in Illinois, and I'm going to use 6% because that was the phase 2 of the program, 3% you have to offset above what the regulatory level of your emissions are. So you had 3% that you had to develop a scrubber or something additional to in real terms offset that 3% emissions cap that you or inventory that you had. The other 3% can be purchased through offsets. Now, what it does is help the industry in a time-wise move towards adoption down the road. It's more cost-effective. If I were asked you to do something today, and I say it's going to cost you $1 million, and I want you to do it right now, you would say, well, I've closed my doors. $500,000 might be more acceptable. So you pay the $500,000 in real technology. The other $500 million is offset through time and the carbon price. At a time we see out there that the technology, the cost of technology lowers, as carbon price may increase, and then at a point you have the opportunity to adopt technology somewhere out in the future. It's a very simplistic way to portray it, but I think that's the way it will play out. This is a fun slide. Livestock is a controversial issue in Illinois, but it is a very significant part of our agricultural footprint in Illinois. And if you ever, there was a cartoon called The Far Side, and they had, one of them was the lookout cow. And so as our kids were growing up, we always said, you drive by a herd, you always had the lookout cow. Well, I came across that picture, and of course you see the lookout cow there. And she's probably looking at that EPA guy coming down the walkway there. But here again, it's livestock industry in Illinois. Has some challenges. I think in part this is a dairy up in northern Illinois that uses a methane digester, powers over 2,000 homes, provides its own electricity. The resulting manure coming from the digester, the processed manure is sanitized and now be land applied and can be sold into the commercial market. There's not an odor issue. The problem, I would say, with digesters is that they are management intensive. There's the maintenance of engines. There's just the maintenance of the systems. You may have a good cow guy, but he has no appreciation of what it takes to operate a digester. So we see the dairy industry especially, they're adopting their management strategies to begin to look at the operations of digesters. And so we hope in the future, and there's a lot of grant money out there for digesters. The state has legislation now that talks about net metering, which instead of being paid 1 or 2 cents per kilowatt hour, now they can receive upwards of 6 cents a kilowatt hour. Slurry Store, here again we've moved somewhat away from lagoons. Now we see the big blue circled containment structures throughout the state. Here again they require monitoring. I'm not here to say that we haven't had releases from them, but I think they're not as problematic as lagoons. We can and have developed cover strategies for these slurry stores. What's of interest today, as we look at global warming as a possible source to these intense rain events, a lot of our design criteria that are required through the Department of Ag and EPA talk about 24-hour rain events or 24-hour, 25-year rain events. And now we're seeing 250-year rain events, 500-year, even greater. And so it's stressing the industry to meet the storage needed for these rain events. And a good example was this last fall when farmers had a very limited amount of time to apply manure to their lands. So now we see some, the newer livestock facilities coming online as developing 1 and even up to 2-year storage for manure. So we see the industry. Instead of surface application, we're now seeing the injection technology. This process here is a tractor is pulling a chisel plow that is dragging. This is a drag line operation. It's pumped out to the field. This tractor just goes back and forth. It provides a very efficient way to apply manure. There are guidelines to agronomic amounts that they can apply. We're also looking at developing winter application rules and phosphorus standards for land application. course, we look at the overall environment of crops in Illinois and pesticides. We see the new pesticide footprint as being Roundup Ready and other herbicides that do not have near the residual life, if any residual life at all. So we see a definite move, and have for a number of years, towards more environmentally friendly herbicides, pesticides, plant genetics resistances. Instead of having to apply a pesticide, we now have that bred into the plant. We're agronomically looking at increasing the root masses of these plants so they can draw from nutrients deeper down in the soil profile, make more efficient use of nutrients. And one of the side benefits is, if we talk about nitrogen being leached out through the drainage systems in Illinois, now with the new agronomics and corn plants of the future, they may begin to limit that leaching process of nitrates. We see the precision nutrient technologies of being to precisely apply fertilizers across the state, variable rate application. The university's been very active in the drainage best management practices, using biochambers at the end of the tile line. The drainage of the water moves to a biochamber, which filters out a lot of the nitrates within that water stream. Machinery, we sometimes we don't pay enough attention. I know growing up and pulling a disc over many acres, if I had a 3 or 4 foot overlap, especially as I got a little tired during the day and a little more distracted, that was not a big deal. Today we can operate machinery very efficiently across the field with precise lines and no overlap, and we can monitor on a per square yard basis or meter basis. We can look at yields across the field. We have much greater technologies and information about our fields. Our engines are much cleaner, and we're developing tillage equipment that limits erosion, keeps more of the trash field cover in place. Some of the other applications I see out there is the increasing adoption of composting. There's tremendous amount of composting going on today. We see a lot of university research projects that are dealing with food waste composting. We see a proliferation of gasifiers out there today. You know, how are we going to burn this new biomass, and does it involve pulling syngases off and using that as a kind of a combined heat and power process? We see a company like De Anza. Now, I'm not speaking to these companies. Some of these companies, I don't agree with their process, but they are interesting. De Anza has proposed a consumer-level ethanol production process. So your grass clippings, your garbage in one end, and guess what? Ethanol comes out the end. And you, oh yeah, yeah. We when they came to us, we had red flags going up around the table. But it will catch. You go to their website, it will catch your attention, because they have really done a good job of wrapping this process in some really nice plastics that are really good looking. But here again, you know, I've not had a chance to look at the process. You have a bin, you're throwing a carbon product in one end, and they're monitoring what is the input through an internet. It's a 24-hour, 7-day-a-week monitoring process. You pay $10,000 to $12,000 for this process. They charge you $1.30 for each gallon pump. They're monitoring through the internet also. There's some real questions I have, but somebody's developed a technology that is catching our attention. We have encapsulation. Ostera is a company that is capturing a waste stream of a water waste treatment plant and pulling out the phosphorus, and there's an encapsulation of that phosphorus into a slow-release phosphorus product. With our concern about phosphorus in streams, are we interested? Sure. Calera is a company that captures CO2 and develops a concrete product. Here again, I'm not I would say I'm very aware of the ADM project, very energy intense process to pump CO2 7,000 feet below the ground. I think we have opportunities for other technologies to be built. Good friends up in North Dakota taught me this: wind power. You're at the edge of the grid, thus wind power units are somewhat less efficient to operate. So we have North Dakota and Minnesota developing strategies for other storage. Okay, we're going to attach that wind power unit to an anhydrous ammonia process. What can we do with anhydrous ammonia? We can store it. So we're beginning to look at strategies to take a wind power unit, develop another product that can be stored and transported. Catches our attention. Sustainable farms. Now, sustainable farms runs a gamut of what will our farms look like in the future. Will they be organic? Will they be off the grid? We see a lot of farms over in Germany that create their own biodiesel. They create methane, so they provide their own power. This move towards sustainable farms is kind of interesting as we see one segment of agriculture, production agriculture, grow and become very industrial-like. We see a significant other part of agriculture move towards farm-based farmer markets, organic, the vineyards. As we talk about depletion of resources, how does that play into farms of the future? It's not an area we look at directly in EPA, but it's one that does have a carbon footprint to it, and so we have an interest. The new business environment. I think this came from Eric Jackson, presentation he made here at the university a few weeks ago, but I thought it really struck at where we look at carbon today. It is the current and future regulations that will drive this. It's customer demands, sustainability of your product. These are all things that consumers and businesses are looking at today. This is where we're going to be in the future, and the comment was made, ignore at your own risk. A policy perspective, this came from the Illinois Manufacturers Association. And ideally, we look at the economic, social, and environmental arenas and how they should coexist. We see what we're encountering today, the economic driver outweighing sometimes social and environmental attributes. We need to change the discussion. I think, and not to be political at all, but I think we have segmented our society, and we don't have the joint benefit of what we can do together to solve some of the issues that we have today. There's skepticism for science. There's skepticism for the political process. There's skepticism for government. I don't think that's a healthy environment. And so we need to change the discussion, and it's a real challenge for us. That's my end of my presentation. If you have any questions, I'd be open to those, and I greatly appreciate the chance to come and speak to you today. Yes?
Well, I'd like to focus on your slide on the rural renaissance and overlay that on the McMansion slide that you showed up there. And you didn't have a slide on the ever-growing amount of roadway that's being built in Illinois. And so this leads me to my my question as to what is IEPA doing in the way of developing policy and ordinances to help communities and counties preserve their farmland and develop growth boundaries. So all of this isn't leapfrogging into the rural area.
That's a great point, and that's something we're very concerned about. I would point to a couple things. Number one, the Illinois Department of Agriculture has the program and the regulatory program that's the Illinois Land Preservation Act that looks at the development of land, and they do offer comments to the process of land acquisition by outside of agriculture.
But it doesn't.
No, it doesn't. That's it, but it's there, and within NRCS and some of our conservation program, we can use the conservation easement program that codifies that this piece of property will only be used for agriculture for its life. We in EPA, I would point towards the Grove development project up to the east side of Bloomington, Illinois. I think we put $900,000 into that project, but it is a ecologically balanced community. It was built in the watershed, Kickapoo, thank you. Through the Kickapoo, Friends of the Kickapoo, it was developed within the headwaters of the Kickapoo Creek. I think here again we see more green development today that we advocate for, and we have some grant funds that help developers with those strategies. But it's still a challenge. We have, and because of the economic conditions, the move towards rural areas has slowed somewhat. But it is a challenge to society here in Illinois, and we I agree with you. We don't have those programs that at times have the teeth to limit expansion through developments of businesses and subdivisions in Illinois. It's interesting, and I had quite a discussion a number of years ago with some county zoning officers, and I think that's, to me, the crux of the problem, is that in most counties there's either an absence of zoning rules or an unwillingness because of this. What do rural communities want today? They want economic development. They want jobs. Are they willing to sacrifice some environmental attributes? Unfortunately, I would say that's true. So we need to visit more directly with our county zoning officials to develop a plan for growth, one that is environmentally sustainable. So that's a great question, and I think we're hitting at it piecemeal. I think we are, in some areas, winning some of the battles, but in others we're not. But it's a good point. Yes.
Something that I didn't see mentioned in your presentation was the rapidly emerging sensor technology arena, and we're reaching the point where we'll be able to cheaply measure how much nutrients and greenhouse gases are leaving a farm field or an animal operation. Are you thinking about that possibility as you're designing these new markets?
Absolutely.
And what would it mean for them, I guess, if you could do that?
Absolutely. We have currently identified a watershed up in Livingston County. We know the conservation programs have definitely helped. But have they been that ultimate answer to our problems with nitrate and phosphates in our waters? No. We have a long way to go. We've struggled with we've offered money to landowners in Illinois, but we haven't been able to get all farmers to adopt those conservation strategies. Now, I would say a lot have, but there are still many more to go. So currently we're working with Watershed in Livingston County, and in that project we're going to look at, okay, what are the adopted conservation practices in place? Are they achieving the results that we think they should? How can they be improved? But more importantly, we're going to look at those that haven't adopted those conservation practices. Why haven't they adopted them? What would it take to get them to adopt them? Is it more conservation money, which I don't think is coming? Is it a regulatory environment that will cause them, which would be engendered great debate and pushback from a lot of the ag groups in Illinois? Or is it something like a carbon trading program, a nutrient trading program that offers incentives from the marketplace? I have a tendency to think today that that marketplace may offer that answer. But when you get into conservation practices in somebody else's land, you get into this land rights issue. It's my land, it's my castle, and that's a significant brick wall out. And so we are beginning to look at it more. We're beginning to drill down, look at the social implications of what they're doing, and trying to develop another dialogue with these producers. It is a concern. Even though we've had a decrease in phosphates and nitrates in our stream, it's still too high. We here again partner with the university in terms of the biochambers, with different perennials. There's a lot of different schemes out there to attack this issue. But here again, kind of going back to your question about land use, it's that same brick wall almost. We can get some adopters that have a sustainable belief in their farms, but there's others that have a different belief. Let me farm it and leave me alone. You had a question? I'm sorry.
Ladies first. Thank you. I'm just wondering on the same topic of the nutrient trading markets, how you would have a functioning nutrient trading market with some sort of incentive to drive the value of the market in the absence of regulatory standards. And I guess the reason I said that is in the carbon market, what ultimately drives the carbon market is a carbon cap. I mean, or the perspective of one in the near future. That's what creates the value of the carbon credits. And so I'm wondering what creates the value of the nutrient trading credits in the absence of regulation.
I think it will be the adoptions of nutrient standards for streams in Illinois. I think it will be that regulatory scheme that develops that underpinning for a market. It's kind of interesting. In the carbon market, if you don't know, carbon per metric ton is trading at 15 cents today. We've had a high of $7.20, which was really a great market at the time, about a year and 3/4 ago. What's interesting about the market is even though we have this 15-cent market, we now have what we call an off-screen market developing, and that's businesses and groups of people that have environmental philosophies doing their part. And that market is actually a $6 market today. Yeah, I think we do definitely need the regulatory underpinning. I agree there, and I think we will see that. Now, we typically look at the Chesapeake Bay region and what's being done out there in terms of a number of nutrient trading strategies. There's one over in Ohio on the Miami River, and I believe there's one out in, is it Puget Sound, or out in the Washington area that's looking at nutrient trading. So we're developing the strategies. From my background, I want it now because I want to get it on the ground while I'm around to push something forward. So, yeah, regulatory underpinning we need.
So how's the nutrient criteria working for you?
How's it working? Our Bureau Chief, Marshall Wellheit's over in Ohio now with the other water bureaus of the U.S. And let me say that 3 to 4 years, 5 years before we see a standard. I would hope sooner. One of the issues we encounter is what we know. I've been amazed at this. I thought we knew a lot about water quality. What we see, what I see, is the methodology used to collect samples 20 years ago is a lot different than what we see today. And how that information transcends up to a usable document today, a usable, defensible document today to discuss water standards. The Water Survey may test a certain way over time. Maybe U.S. EPA or EPA, we've done it a different way. We're trying to look at all of those different sampling data and how can we bring them together in a defensible document that would help us argue for water standards. Because as you know today, we can decide things within this group, and we might have a collective similar agenda. But once we take it out into the larger arena of citizens of the United States, we can really encounter a firestorm of resistance, and they can question science, and they can question data retrieval. And we have to today be very transparent in what we do and have very defensible positions and behind what we do in terms of developing these standards. Does that answer your question? No. Okay. Any other questions? Oh, one more, and I think Nancy. Okay.
How much is EPA involved in trying to create an environment that's economically friendly to food animal production? A lot of people say that it's not economic, it's not attractive environment because the regulatory costs are too high. But it seems like it would be really important for the state to have a value-added animal production economy, given all the food grains that we produce, and the general trends seem not to be increasing.
We just did a brief overview of states within the Midwest that had various permitting programs for the livestock industry. Minnesota being the most stringent, land of 10,000 lakes and such. And we find through that brief study that the livestock industry can grow in the presence of an aggressive regulatory program. Having said that, when we look at Illinois, you have to realize we have two environmental programs. One program is housed within the Department of Agriculture, the Livestock Facility Management Act. That requires any producer since 1997 building an operation or expanding to meet certain criteria. Those criteria are matched by what we have in the subtitle E, which are our livestock regulations. So the Department of Ag's LMFA program looks at the livestock operation from when it's built to when it becomes operational. They require manure management plans. They require a design and a response to all of the standards in building and housing and all those things. We typically, we're an enforcement agency. We come in when something happens. A lagoon discharges, manure application. We do partner with the ag industry. We promote best management practices. I would say to you, I don't really think the livestock industry in Illinois is really concerned about the environmental regulations. They see Illinois as being a favorable environment. Not that they love it, by any stretch, but their biggest concern are the animal rights issues. That's the one that really strikes at the expansion of agriculture in Illinois. So I think we have a good environmental program in Illinois. We're in the process of developing, as I indicated, a phosphorus standard for manure application and winter application rules. So I think we're moving forward. Are we as far along as some other states? No, but we're getting there.